there's been sort of an uptick in xenophobia and racism towards Chinese people since the whole coronavirus episode started. And that's something that really impacts people's mental health.
Mm-hmm.
How do you suggest you deal with that? Because I know that I get quite angry when I see examples of racism, like on social media comments, and it's just very dismaying to deal with, I think.
Oh, this is one of those things that I actually have a little bit of difficulty with.
Yeah.
Because I don't experience it. I don't have the same...
You don't have the same experience because you live in an area that is majority Asian, so...
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, sure, I see, like, racist comments and stuff like that. But at the same time, I don't know. It's strange because, for me, I live in a very Asian area. And most of the people that I hang out with are Asian. And a lot of them are from China. And they freak out just as much as everybody else does.
Of course, yeah.
And everybody's just kind of like, even the people that I know, they're like, oh, if anybody came back from China recently, you know, stay home for a few days just to see if you develop any symptoms before, like, going out in public and stuff like that, like public safety stuff, you know?
Yeah, but like there's that, and then there's like actual racism, which is malicious and targeted, personal.
Yeah, and I feel like I handle it very differently than other people.
How so?
I think that, in a way, I remind myself that Asians are a majority in existence, period. Even though we're technically considered a minority in the States. I mean, we are a minority in the States. But I think globally, the world has such a westernized skew that it just kind of is that way. And I kind of look at it like, oh, they're just ignorant. And I feel more secure about my own Asian identity and that it doesn't bother me.
Mm-hmm.
When people are like overtly racist, when they're maliciously like racist, like intentionally so, I just kind of disregard them for whatever reason, usually because they're just being jerks about it, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, a lot of times people just don't know, you know, and a lot of people are just ignorant, and I understand the fact that kind of that's the way society is built to a certain extent, especially with like fear mongering and all of the stuff related to coronavirus. I think it's just really easy to find. Everybody's trying to look for
like a scapegoat,
you know?
Yeah.
And I understand why people do it. I don't think it's right. I think that those people are dumb, but I think the way that I try to rationalize it is that the reality is they're just really dumb and ignorant. And like, that's the way that our society is kind of set up. I don't think that being personally singled out for it would make me feel any differently. I think that I would just look at it from a larger perspective.
Yeah.
You know?
But I also think you have a very unique experience as an Asian American who lives in the LA area, because you know you did grow up in a really majority Asian area, but I think like for me growing up in Australia, in Sydney, like it was still like there was still a lot of Asians. A lot of them were from Hong Kong and Taiwan, but you know it's not to the extent where I felt like you still have experiences growing up that you just feel marginalized and othered by people, and I think when you come from a background like that, like when these things happen now as an adult, it still like hits that like deep insecure part of yourself that feels like you just don't belong, and that like other people don't think you belong here. And even though you grew up here and you have this identity that's very deeply rooted in this country, it's just like you're a second-class citizen in your own home. I think that's it's quite jarring when it happens now, because you feel like for so long, you've gone along quite fine and everything's been fine, but then suddenly someone comes along and says something really malicious or like deeply ignorant, or they just make you feel less than a person, dehumanized.
Yeah.
And it just like sets you back a lot. Well, at least that's my experience. And it makes me angry, actually. Like I've had some like really terrible, just annoying, frustrating incidents happen. And like some of my other friends don't get as bothered, because they're like, well, you are Asian, you are a minority in this country, just accept that. But also at the same time, like, why do we have to deal with that? Like, I know why we have to deal with that, but like, just the injustice of it really frustrates me.
I can definitely understand that.
Yeah.
At least from a psychological perspective. Like, if not from a personal level, right? Because obviously, yeah, I come from a different kind of privilege, right?
Yeah.
To feel like I have this security, right? But obviously, when there's a part of you there's a part of your identity that you're a little insecure about, right? That you feel secure most of the time, but there's something about it that, like, you feel more personally attacked when something like this happens, right? Or in situations where you experience individualized racism. Yeah, and I think that those feelings come from a place of someone attacking your identity, and that's a very normal response.
Yeah.
And I don't necessarily think that. I mean, it depends on what you mean by, like, how should people deal with it, right? I think that people, like, it depends on what your goal is. Because for some people, I would tell them, hey, like, embrace that fire that you feel and turn that into something that is productive.
Right.
Turn that into a passion for social justice.
Yeah. Jed, that's sublimation. That's what I was telling you about yesterday.
Yeah, right? That's something that you could tell people, right? But for other people, it's an injury.
Yeah.
And that requires a different kind of response, right?
Like a trauma.
Like in a sense, like almost dealing with a trauma.
Yeah.
In the sense that you're trying to mitigate the emotional pain that you're experiencing from this very deeply wounding experience. And how do you deal with it is also, like, a very different question, right? For how do you deal with it from somebody from my background versus somebody from your background is going to be very different.
Yeah.
That, again, is one of those questions that is going to have to go back to, like, what do you feel like you're capable of doing? Like, how do you respond to situations like this? And what is causing you to feel what you feel? Like, specifically, is it that part of your identity has been challenged, or that people are treating you a certain way and that you're experiencing xenophobia, right? It's really hard to say. And it also depends, like, for some people, like, they have this kind of desire or this drive to correct people, and that works for some people as well, like you use it as an educational experience for whoever is being racist towards you, and that those people exist, right? And for some people, I would tell them, hey, that's the best way to deal with it. But other people aren't those types of people, and it just really depends on the individual. Like, what do they feel like?
Yeah, I think I'm
capable of
at
doing.
this point in my life where I just want to live my own life and not have to worry about that sort of thing. But then it's still disappointing when it comes up. I think it can be also quite insidious. Like, growing up in Sydney, you don't think that you have a terrible, like, sort of experience where you're marginalized and othered. But when I went to New York for the first time, like 3 years ago, it was like a completely different experience for me. It was like, for the first time, people treated me like as an equal. Like, they just talked to me like it was just any other person. Like, I didn't feel like there was this barrier between me and other people like I did in Australia. And that was quite overwhelming to experience for basically the first time. Like, sometimes you're in this sort of situation that you don't realize is actually affecting your mental health. It's just this deep deep sense of not belonging can be quite insidious.
Yeah. And I mean, I can't, like, I know how I would handle it as a therapist for somebody, right? If they
Right.
came to me and this was the issue, like, I would know how to handle it for them.
Yeah.
But but that's a very personalized,
Well, okay. I'm asking you as a therapist.
for you, right?
Yeah.
But that also is like your background and all that kind of stuff, right? So, I mean, there are options for different people, but for you specifically, it sounds like developing this idea of your value outside of, like, valuing your own identity to the point where it doesn't necessarily, I don't necessarily want to say that I wouldn't necessarily say that I don't want you to have to feel this negative emotion, because at a certain point, like, we should feel
Negative emotions.
this negative emotion,
Yeah.
because somebody is trying to attack us,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So
It's like self-defense.
yeah, it's just acknowledging that feeling and learning how to deal with it.
Yeah.
So for me personally, I can rationalize and externalize, but for you, it might be a little bit different, right? Do you want to completely stop feeling this altogether, or do you want to feel but be okay with it,
Yeah. I prefer the latter.
right? So that would be a different, like, feeling and being okay with it. It could be as simple as learning to ground yourself after, like, once you've experienced this emotion, grounding yourself immediately after and be like talking yourself down and reducing that physiological response that you feel,
Yeah.
right? That could be it. And learning to kind of desensitize that way,
Yeah.
right? And just acknowledging that this is an emotion that I experience, but, like, I can deal with it calmly and collectedly,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. And I think that's something that I've definitely improved in over the years. Because, I would, especially as a teenager in my early 20s, I would get such intense emotional reactions to things, and it would be so hard to regulate my response. And it would create a lot of anxiety for me. But especially grounding techniques were really helpful. And I think it's just also age, honestly, just like getting a bit more mature, a bit more life experience, and then you realize, you don't, there's more to life and more to the world than just this very, like, deep, intense, like, specific thing. And you just feel a bit more okay with yourself.
Yeah, and I think part of it is just developing that confidence in your identity, right? Accepting
yeah.
who you are and accepting the fact that people are going to be stupid, and that helps us to process and rationalize and understand, and to be less emotionally responsive, and more cognizant of who we are. And I think for me, because I have a lot of that confidence in my identity, that I don't feel like, even if somebody were to come up to me and be overtly racist, I'd be like, okay. I think it's happened to me a few times, and I just kind of, like, look at them and I'm like, dude, you're weird. Like, they think I'm, like, the idea is that I'm weird, but then I look at them and I'm like, most normal people don't do that.
Yeah.
So, maybe you're the weird one.
There's something definitely wrong with you.
Yeah, it's not me. It's
not
you.
me. It's definitely you.
I think that comes with confidence, right? That comes with me being comfortable with being Asian American. That comes with me being comfortable with, like, identifying as somebody who is trying to be between cultures, right?
Yeah.
I think it's a really strange place to be, trying to navigate, because I work with families.
Right.
And so a lot of my work is navigating between cultures. It's trying to help parents understand their kids, like overseas parents trying to understand their American-born kids.
Yeah.
And me, who is American-born, but also, I guess, was raised in a way that is cognizant of, like, how overseas parents, like, I think me and my parents had conflict as well, right?
Yeah, of course.
So I think, so for us, or the whole process of me learning to deal with that and learning to understand where they're coming from and learning to understand the baggage that they carry, I think it's helpful because my parents I feel like my parents were very emotionally mature,
Mhm.
and so it was helpful for me to be able to talk to them as I got older and really process with words and really develop a real understanding of why they do things the way that they do, that I finally began to see that cultural bridge as a way to help American-born kids connect better with their parents and have better relationships with them and be more confident about what their identity is and who they are. Right. And really understanding who they are.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I think that's like really the foundation of everything.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And like, how many of, like, as a kid, I didn't know, like, what does it really mean to be kind of Chinese until I really like looked into like my ancestry, and my parents finally told me the story of like where they came from and their journey, right? But oftentimes I guess a lot of people don't have the opportunity, and a lot of people don't come from a family situation like that, but those people end up in my office. And
Yeah.
and there are opportunities to teach them. And I think that that's a place to start. I think that's what I would encourage. Like,
yeah, because a lot of people aren't as lucky as you.
Yeah.
They don't come from families where they can talk openly about these things. And they might not have a great relationship with their parents.
Yeah. And I think the way that you develop confidence in your identity is different based on the situation, right? If your parents are open enough to come to if your Asian parents are open enough to come to a therapy session, you know, then you're already like halfway there.
So far ahead.
So, yeah, that's already miles ahead.